My mother-in-law brings my ex with a restraining order to the wedding and calls me a pathetic divorcee and damaged goods, but my husband cuts her out of his life. I, a 38-year-old woman, found love again with my wonderful husband, who is 34, after a horrible 10-year relationship with my ex that ended in a lot of pain and disappointment for me. Honestly, I had given up on love and relationships and expected to become a crazy cat lady. Then I met my husband at a friend's wedding. He was a friend of the groom. We met at the open bar, started talking, and that was it. We were practically glued to each other the entire night. It felt like a romantic comedy, and at the end of the night, when we finally said goodbye after exchanging numbers, I had butterflies in my stomach for the first time in years. We met up again the next day, and the rest is history. It's been almost 2 years since my friend's wedding, and every day with him has been a fairy tale. He proposed to me on our first anniversary, and over the last 6 months, we planned our wedding and got married. My relationship is perfect for me, but there has always been one small or not so small problem: my mother-in-law. My relationship with my mother-in-law was complicated from day one. When I met her for the first time, I could feel the disapproval radiating from her. She wasn't subtle about it at all, and made it clear she didn't think I was good enough for her son. My husband is an only child, and his father passed away when he was just 16, so it's been just him and his mother ever since. Naturally, she is extremely protective of him and wants him to have the best in life, and clearly, she didn't think I was good enough. She had a problem with the fact that I'm older than her son. She also didn't like that I was divorced. At first, she didn't know I had been in an abusive relationship because that's a very personal matter for me, and I don't like to talk about it with most people. In her eyes, divorced women can't be trusted, and I was someone who wouldn't measure up to her standards. At first, I tried to downplay her comments, telling myself she was just being protective of her son. But over time, her dislike for me only seemed to grow. Every family gathering became a battlefield, with my mother-in-law taking every opportunity to belittle me and undermine my relationship with my husband. Despite her constant negativity, I tried my best to keep the peace. After all, I love my husband more than anything in the world, and I didn't want to cause unnecessary tension between him and his mother. But deep down, her words would cut me deeply, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never truly be accepted by her. My husband has always been fiercely on my side. He's gotten into countless arguments defending me, and has even threatened to cut ties with her if she didn't improve her behavior toward me. But it's always been an endless, repetitive cycle. My mother-in-law makes a sarcastic remark or treats me with indifference. My husband notices and speaks up. An argument follows, and after maybe a couple of days of silence, my mother-in-law apologizes and is nice to me for a few weeks. It's been mentally exhausting, but my husband feels responsible for his mother, and I understand that she will always be part of my life. Unfortunately, things got worse when he proposed. I suppose she expected this to be a fleeting romance and that we would break up sooner or later. She even asked if I was pregnant and said that even if I were, he didn't have to marry me. This was very unusual for her because she's a traditional person who would never ordinarily say something like that. My husband initially thought she was joking and brushed it off. He asked if he could have her wedding ring to propose to me, and she had a complete meltdown. She started with the same old rant about me being damaged goods and unfortunate, and my husband got so angry that he told her I had been abused in my last marriage and didn't deserve such cruelty for something that wasn't my fault. I think he hoped that learning about the abuse would change her opinion of me and make her treat me more kindly, but it completely backfired. She started saying things like women like me lie about such things to get men in trouble, and that he should be careful trusting me. At that point, he abandoned all hope that she would see reason or behave sensibly. In the end, he gave up and bought a new ring with which he proposed to me. I wasn't aware of this, and my husband only told me about it very recently after our wedding. He apologized to me for discussing my past in my absence. I didn't mind at all because I knew he was just trying to make things better for me, and that's all that mattered to me. From the engagement to the wedding, we deliberately avoided my mother-in-law. My husband saw her a few times but made sure I didn't encounter her even once. It reached the point where I actually noticed and asked why he wouldn't let us meet at all, but he just brushed it off, saying things like he didn't want her to upset me by saying something stupid as usual. That made sense to me. I now know he was protecting me from those ugly accusations. I had dreamed of this moment for as long as I could remember, walking down the aisle to the man of my dreams, surrounded by our loved ones, ready to embark on a new chapter together. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. My wedding was outdoors in a garden, and there was unexpected rain in the morning, so I was really stressed out from the start. The rain cleared up in the afternoon, and my lovely wedding planners managed to set up the decorations and everything in place, so I finally started feeling less stressed about the day. I know that at almost 40, it shouldn't be so important to me, but I just wanted to have my perfect day after everything I went through in my last marriage. I walked down the aisle with my dad, and it was like my dreams. I was the happiest bride and couldn't wait to say my vows. While I was at the altar, my heart racing with excitement and nerves, we were about to say our vows when I heard a very surprised "oh my God" behind me. It was my maid of honor, Alana, who has been my closest friend for as long as I can remember. The moment I heard her, I knew something must be terribly wrong for her to interrupt the ceremony like that. I turned to her and saw her glaring furiously at the guests, so I turned to see what she was looking at. I don't think I could prepare myself for what I saw. There was my mother-in-law making her grand entrance with an incredibly smug expression on her face. She was with a man, and she was wearing an off-white lace dress. For a moment, I thought the white dress was what had shocked Alana so much, and I almost laughed because it was so typical of her to pull a stunt like that, and it didn't even bother me. I was about to turn back and continue the ceremony, but then I saw it. It wasn't my mother-in-law's horribly timed grand entrance or her white dress that caused that reaction. It was the person accompanying her. To my horror, she was with none other than Joseph. Yes, my abusive ex-husband Joseph, the man who made my life hell for years. It felt like I had been punched in the stomach. It had taken me so long to get back to a normal life and fight through the aftermath of that marriage. Even now, when I think about how I survived those years, I feel sick. And here it was, on my wedding day, the day I was finally starting the best chapter of my life, and he was back again. I was just terrified. For a moment, I even forgot where I was. It felt like I had been transported back to the past, and I couldn't even see my actual surroundings. Alana could see what was happening and came over to me, held my hand, and only then did I snap back to reality. How could she do this to me? How could she bring him here, knowing the pain and trauma he had caused me? My husband was extremely worried and kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. In my confusion, I realized that even though he knew everything about my ex and my first marriage, he didn't know what Joseph actually looked like. But I wasn't in a state to talk, and just kept staring blankly at my mother-in-law. I saw Alana say something to my husband, but I couldn't hear what she said. Before I could do anything, my husband acted. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He walked straight up to his mother and my ex, and in a voice that left no room for argument told them to leave. My mother-in-law, of course, refused to go, and said she had every right to be there to watch her son get married. He told her that he had been very patient with her until now, but this time she had crossed the line. He said if she didn't leave immediately, we would call the police. She said we couldn't do that because she hadn't done anything wrong. At that moment, I felt truly sick and needed to sit down. My bridesmaids and my mom were doing everything they could to calm me down. I wasn't even aware of all the things happening around me because I had to sit down and catch my breath. My bridesmaids were incredible, and I'm so grateful to them for handling the situation as best they could. They were the ones who later told me how things unfolded because, at that moment, my mind just wasn't working. The only thing I could hear was my own heart pounding faster than it ever had. The only part of the conversation I really caught was what my husband did next. He told my mother-in-law he would call the police for bringing someone I had a restraining order against near me, and that if she didn't want things to get ugly, she should leave. It was my ex who spoke after that. I hadn't heard his voice in years, but the moment he spoke, I literally felt chills down my spine. I felt like I was going to throw up. My ex then said the police couldn't do anything because the restraining order I had against him had expired, and the law couldn't do anything about it. Somehow, in the middle of planning the wedding and my new life, I had completely forgotten about that. My ex kept talking, saying my husband should be grateful that his mother was looking out for him by not letting him marry me because I would ruin his life just like I ruined his. I couldn't believe what was happening on what was supposed to be the best day of my life. He tried to say something else, but before he could utter another word, my husband literally lunged at him and punched him in the face. That was it. The entire ceremony turned into complete chaos. My ex tried to hit my husband back, and our groomsmen had to step in to defuse the situation. There was a lot of shoving and yelling, which eventually resulted in my ex being literally thrown out of the venue. By that point, someone had also called security. My ex didn't return, but my mother-in-law was still there. By then, nearly an hour had passed since all this drama began. In my mind, I had accepted that my wedding was over and that I wouldn't be getting married that day. I was at a point where I didn't even feel sad anymore. I was just numb. My bridesmaids took me inside, and I sat in the dressing room alone because I had sent everyone away to give me some space. I was wondering what to do when I heard a knock on the door and saw it was my husband. He asked if he could come in, and of course, I said yes. He sat down and apologized for everything that had happened. He said he should have been firmer with his mother from the start and not let things get to this point in the first place, and he asked me to forgive him. I couldn't believe this man. I had been blaming myself for everything that had happened, and here he was asking for forgiveness. I broke down, and we both started crying. After I had calmed down, I told him he had nothing to apologize for. We sat there in silence for a while, holding hands. After some time, he told me he had asked the guests to leave and that only our wedding party was still there. Even though it wasn't how we had expected things to go, there was nothing I wanted more than to get married. I wasn't sure if I could walk down the aisle again after everything that had happened, but seeing his face, I just couldn't say no. So I walked down the aisle toward my best friend and biggest supporter. This time, we said our vows, looking into each other's eyes without interruptions, and got married with only our closest friends as witnesses. After the ceremony, we danced and had a small, intimate reception and donated all the leftover food. We went home as husband and wife for the first time, and all the bad things that had happened felt like a distant nightmare. We went on our honeymoon and didn't talk about the ceremony or my mother-in-law even once. I tried to bring it up a few times, but my husband wouldn't let me, saying we shouldn't talk about such things during such happy moments because they had already tried to sabotage our happiness once. I was curious but agreed with him. During the honeymoon, he acted a little suspiciously. Nothing major, but he kept getting a lot of calls, and every time I asked who it was, he'd say it was work. This was unusual because his workplace has been really good about not bothering him during vacations. We've taken several trips before this. I asked if there was a problem, but he brushed it off, saying they were busy and he needed to help a bit to make it easier. It still seemed strange to me, but I trusted him completely and focused on enjoying our time together. Our honeymoon lasted 2 weeks, and we returned a few days ago. I just couldn't contain my curiosity. Yesterday, I overheard my husband talking to someone on the phone, and he sounded really agitated. So I asked him who it was and if everything was okay. At first he tried to dodge the question, saying it was work stuff and I didn't need to worry about it. But I knew he was hiding something and wouldn't let it go until he told me what was going on. That's how I found out that ever since the disaster at our wedding day, my husband has been secretly fighting an entire battle with my mother-in-law, trying to get her to leave us alone. I've already mentioned that we've had plenty of arguments in the past where he's stepped in to defend me, but that didn't make my mother-in-law truly listen. So this time, he decided to take things a step further and do something that made it clear he was serious about wanting her out of our lives. Apparently, he told my mother-in-law at the wedding that she would never see him again, but of course, she didn't take him seriously and kept calling him during our honeymoon until he had to literally block her from everything. My mother-in-law kept calling his workplace every day, pretending to be sick and saying it was urgent, which worried the receptionist enough to contact him even while we were on our honeymoon. My husband knew all of this was just drama she was creating to get his attention. She had faked being sick before to get him to break contact, but this was the first time she tried involving his workplace. Of course, my husband didn't want his coworkers to know about this, so he had to unblock her and contact her. She was hysterical, as expected, and told him she was gravely ill and needed him to come see her immediately. My husband told her he didn't owe her anything and never planned to see her again, but if she was truly ill, he could arrange for a nurse to stay with her for the time being. However, he knew there would be no need for this because there was no way she was actually sick. She threw another tantrum over this and said she didn't want a stranger living with her when her own son was alive and well to do it. Let me remind everyone that she was fully aware we were on our honeymoon. My husband lost his patience at that point and told her that if she couldn't accept what he was offering, then there was nothing more he could do for her, and he hung up. Of course, she didn't accept this and continued calling him incessantly. Things escalated to the point where my husband had to tell his secretary not to take her calls or messages anymore. It was around this time that I noticed something was going on and confronted him about it. He was determined not to let her disrupt our honeymoon or upset me further. So that morning he called her and let her know that if she didn't stop the drama, she could say goodbye to the idea of ever seeing him again and told her not to call anymore. He hung up before she could say anything else, and that seemed to work for the rest of our honeymoon. She didn't call again. But, of course, nothing is ever that simple with her. She waited until the honeymoon was over and we were back home, and my husband thought she had finally decided to leave us alone. He was wrong, of course. Apparently she has become even more unhinged than usual, and her lawyer contacted my husband, saying that if he didn't start responding to her and including her in his life, she would have no choice but to file an elder abuse case against him for neglect during a time of serious illness. When he asked what this serious illness was, her lawyer said we were causing her mental trauma by cutting her off, which was affecting her blood pressure among other things. I couldn't believe it. Let me make it clear that my mother-in-law has no history of any blood pressure-related illnesses. This is nothing more than a scheme to guilt him, or simply create enough of a scene that he gives in to breaking no contact. We know it. My husband knows it, and my mother-in-law certainly knows it, but, of course, she'd never admit it. The conversation I overheard my husband having yesterday was with his lawyer. Apparently, both my mother-in-law's lawyer and my husband's lawyer think we should resolve things among ourselves rather than involving the courts. Even my husband's lawyer said that if we chose to fight this, it would be tedious, and family courts are often lenient with elderly individuals, so this would be little more than a waste of time. So the easiest option seems to be just enduring it and having my husband apologize to my mother-in-law and break no contact. However, he is still extremely upset about what happened at the wedding and doesn't want to simply let it go and start over. We both know this would only make my mother-in-law feel she can continue crossing our boundaries and doing whatever she wants without consequences. My husband has been beating himself up over this and didn't want to tell me because he knew I'd blame myself. He told me he's fine with taking things to court and that if I don't want us to have contact with my mother-in-law, we never will, no matter what it takes. So he's left the decision to me. I'm extremely conflicted and don't know what to do. On one hand, I haven't forgiven and will never forgive my mother-in-law for what she did at my wedding. And I don't think I can just pretend nothing happened and have her in my life again. But I also feel guilty for what my husband is going through and feel like I'm the cause of all this trouble and drama. I've considered simply telling him I'm okay with him having my mother-in-law in his life, but deep down, I know I'll never feel safe around her again. What would be the best path forward here? Update 1. I didn't expect such overwhelming support for my little rant. I sincerely appreciate all the kindness I've received through comments and private messages from you. I haven't been able to respond to everyone, but I'm reading everything, and it's given me a lot of clarity. Some of you suggested that my husband and I should take my mother-in-law to court because, as there are no actual medical records involved, she really can't prove my husband and I have been neglecting or causing her physical distress. I agree with that and have considered it, but the whole issue here is that I don't want to be involved with lawyers and judges over what is essentially just a tantrum from an adult woman. I've been talking with my husband, and we're considering breaking no contact with my mother-in-law. We've gone through every possible scenario, and at this point, I think it would be simpler if my husband started talking to her again. However, we've decided that even if the two of them are on speaking terms, that doesn't mean I am too. I never want to see my mother-in-law again, and I've made that clear. My husband agrees and will let my mother-in-law know that she's not allowed in our house or to have any contact with me ever again. I'm not entirely happy with how things have turned out, but I guess there's nothing else I can do. The only thing I can say is that at least I won't have to deal with that woman again. I'm trying to stay positive and see this as the bright side of all this drama. Some of you have also asked if I'm considering taking any action against my ex. Honestly, I don't think it's worth it. I'm sure it was my mother-in-law who reached out to him. I still don't know what she was trying to achieve there. Did she really think my husband would leave me because my ex said I ruined lives? Maybe she was just trying to upset me enough to back out of the wedding. I've spoken to my lawyer, and she believes it would be complicated to renew the restraining order because, aside from the wedding, my ex hasn't done anything since the divorce. Even at the wedding, it could be argued he didn't actively do anything to harm me. More than anything, I just don't want to see him again. And unless he tries something, I just want to avoid him for as long as I can. Anyway, my husband is going to contact my mother-in-law and meet with her. I hope she agrees to leave me out of this because if not, I don't know what we're supposed to do. Update 2. Things didn't go as well as we'd hoped. I knew we were being too optimistic. My husband told his mother that he'd be in touch with her and visit regularly, but that she was no longer welcome in our home. My mother-in-law threw another tantrum and said he was isolating her, and that if my husband allowed me to act this way, then when we had kids, I wouldn't let her see them, and I'd steal her grandchildren from her. My husband was honestly so shocked by how quickly she jumped to these conclusions that he couldn't even say anything. He told her the truth, that we weren't even thinking about having kids anytime soon, and that it didn't make sense to base her decision on something that might not happen for years. Of course, my mother-in-law wasn't happy with this and said this was yet another way I was mentally abusing her and isolating her. My husband lost his patience with this and told her that none of this would have happened if she hadn't pulled her stunt at our wedding. My husband didn't want to tell me what she said about that, but after much pleading, he told me she said she was trying to show him the truth about what kind of woman I was to protect him from marrying me. My husband lost his temper at that and walked out. He said it didn't matter what she did anymore and that we were done with her. We're prepared to waste our time and money in courts and with lawyers. And if that means she's out of our lives forever, so be it. Update 3. A few months ago, I posted about my crazy mother-in-law sabotaging my wedding and then trying to blackmail my husband and me into forgetting everything she did and letting her back into our lives. I have an update on the situation in case anyone is still interested. When my husband told my mother-in-law to go ahead and call her lawyer, she thought he was bluffing and that we wouldn't actually let things go that far. But we were serious, and the next time she tried to contact him, he told her to only reach us through our lawyer. That offended her greatly, and she started randomly showing up at our house to try to talk to him. It got to the point where I was scared to open the door in case I saw her standing there. It was not a pleasant situation, to say the least. My husband and I were talking about our options in this situation. On one particularly frustrating day, I jokingly told him that maybe we should move without telling her. I wasn't even serious when I said it, but the moment I did, we looked at each other and realized it might actually make things better for us. Luckily, we both have a decent amount of savings, so we could afford to move to a rented place while our house was listed for sale. We contacted a real estate agent, put up a for sale sign, and moved almost overnight. We knew my mother-in-law would see the sign and freak out. We settled into our small 2-bedroom apartment without unpacking much, because we knew it wouldn't be too difficult to sell our house and start looking for a new place. Sure enough, 2 days after we moved, our lawyer called to tell us she was being bombarded with questions. We told her to ignore them and to let my mother-in-law know that we'd attend any court date, but that she shouldn't expect to see us again. A few days after that situation, we were told she was dropping any case and wanted my husband to talk to her again. For now, we're focusing on our marriage and finding a new place to start fresh. We're thinking of a condo with good security in the building to keep unwanted guests away. Update 4. Well, we've moved, and in the end, everything turned out great. Besides having security, the place is nicer and bigger, which was a welcome change. I'm sure my mother-in-law will eventually find out where we live because she's so obsessive, but there's not much she can do. Our lawyer also prepared everything for a restraining order against her, so if she shows up, there will be consequences. Now we feel safer and don't have to deal with her anymore. It's a relief to know everything worked out, and that she won't bother us again because, honestly, everything she did was on an astronomical level of crazy.